Friends, family, and cohorts, welcome back to the Fight or Flight podcast. Today, we are joined by a guest whose name commands attention and whose leadership has shaped the lives of thousands across the military, government, and private sectors. Lieutenant General John E. Wissler, United States Marine Corps, retired after an extraordinary 39 years of service to our country. General, thank you for your service. He began his career after graduating from the United States Naval Academy, later earning a master's in systems management from the Air Force Institute of Technology. He has always led from the front across every level of command, from platoon commander to commanding general of the Marine Expeditionary Force to leading all U.S. Marine operations in Iraq during a pivotal time in our history. General has served as Marine Corps aide to the President from 1991 to 1993, supporting both President George H.W. Bush and President Bill Clinton, working directly in the White House during one of the most complex geopolitical eras of our time. General oversaw the Marine Corps' global budget as Deputy Commandant for Programs and Resources, responsible for allocating over $40 billion annually. He coordinated humanitarian relief in Nepal, the Philippines, and across Asia Pacific, building alliances and delivering aid where others would have hesitated. Since his retirement, Lieutenant General Wissler has transitioned into the private sector, serving as a senior advisor to First Command Financial Services, a leadership partner at Severn Leadership Group, a contributor at the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership, and a thought partner to many organizations working on the frontier of innovation from defense to AI. He is a decorated Marine, a tested leader, a mentor to generations, a rugby fan, and an absolute honor to welcome him today to our Fight or Flight podcast. General, thank you for being here. It is truly an honor.
Miles, thanks for that kind introduction. I wish my dad was here. He'd be wondering who the heck you were talking about. Thanks for your comment on service, but to be honest, my wife is the one who really deserves it because she followed me around the globe for over 39 years and she kept me grounded, which is probably even the more important piece of that. So it's great to be here. I look forward to our discussion.
Yeah, humility is one thing I've always recognized about you, and that's one of the things I try to emulate. So I'm very grateful in that regard. And happy wife, happy life is something I preach every day of the week. So I know where you're coming from with that. Thank you. I spent a lot of time thinking about how to prep for this. In all of your accomplishments and all the knowledge that you've accumulated and the experience, and you've led at every level from fire teams to commanding tens of thousands. I'd like to understand, what does leadership look like when no one's watching?
First of all, great question. I would add this caveat. A lot of people say, character is what you do when nobody's watching. And I'll give you my definition of leadership here in a minute, and I say this as a precursor to that. I also think sometimes it's harder to make decisions to be a leader when everybody's watching. And I say that from the perspective that if nobody's watching, you're sort of anonymous. But if everybody's watching, when you make the unpopular decision because it's the right thing, not the easy thing, that in my mind takes sometimes more moral courage than simply what it is when nobody's watching. I had the privilege to work for a bunch of great leaders, and one of those great leaders happened to be General Jim Mattis when he was, and now former Secretary of Defense. And he harped on having a definition of leadership that you subscribe to, that you wanted, what kind of a leader do you want to be? And over the time in the Marine Corps and since, I've tried to, build, and I've had several definitions. And I'm not saying my definition is the definition, but this is the one that at the end of every day, even now, I'll sit down and sort of ask myself, reflect on, did I live this model of leadership today? And leadership is one of those things, you have to be the same leader at home that you are at work, that you are in your community. You can't fake it. And then you start trying to fake it in one of those three venues, the wheels fall off. But here's my definition. Leadership is the sum of those qualities of competence, compassion, and courage that enables a person to inspire people to go to places they can't or won't go on their own. Competence, compassion, and courage to inspire. I used to think there was some control piece in there, but what I've realized is that if you can, no kidding, inspire people, that's the only control you need. Maybe every once in a while you got to kind of pull them back a little bit. You got to get them inside the left and right lateral limits of where you're headed. But for the most part, if you can inspire people to go to places they can't or won't go on your own, my experience is they will far exceed your expectations, because what you do is you empower them. So that idea of competence is twofold in our lives. Obviously, one is competence in what our profession is. But then there's also that idea of competence as a leader. Are you building those root skills that you need to have as a leader? The idea of compassion is threefold. It's compassion with yourself. We all will face failure in our lives, but the real leader will be able to take on that failure with a bit of resilience, with a bit of grit, with a bit of endurance, pick themselves back up and get back into the fray. You have to have compassion for the people that you lead. Why? Because nothing's ever going to be perfect. And in that compassion for the people you lead, you have to be able to accept failure, and not malfeasance necessarily, but just where people just maybe you're allowing them to execute against your expectations, and maybe they didn't do it exactly the way you would have done it, but you have to have compassion and sort of pick them up and dust them off and get them going off in the right direction. And then it's compassion with the people that lead you. That compassion, I think, is exceptionally important, because you have to come to the realization sometimes that the people that lead you may have more information. They may have bigger insights. They may have a different view, that because being a good leader means owning the decision, they may not be able to share with you everything that's going in there. And then the courage part is really, the courage to do the right thing, not the easy thing. And that's why I said that idea up front about it's not always what you do when nobody's looking. It's sometimes what you do when everybody's looking. To do that right thing, not the easy thing. It's easy for most of us to tell people when they've done a good job. It's harder for us to tell them when perhaps they haven't done such a good job. And in that, to do it in a way that doesn't break their spirit. They don't become crushed by that. And then in all of that, to inspire. And by inspiration, I don't mean the rah-rah and, Newt Rockney. I mean, by the way you live your life, by the way you deal with people, you inspire them. I like the phrase kneecap to kneecap leadership, eyeball to eyeball, sitting down with people, getting to know who they are, understanding who they are, what their goals are, where they want to go, what they want to do, being able to come back to them and converse with them as things happen in the world in a way that concentrates on maybe where they're at in their life. In essence, to love the people that you lead, but to love them through action, not emotion. That doesn't mean that loving through action can't turn into emotion. I've been in some amazing organizations, teams, units that I was a part of in combat. There were significant emotional bonds. I'm not saying that, but they grew to those significant emotional bonds by action. And what that primary action is basically a commitment to them, a commitment through time. That one precious resource none of us have enough of and is non-renewable. And when they see that you commit to them through your action, they will come to understand that you truly do love them. And then obviously that inspiration to get people to do things they can't or won't do. The can'ts usually just require you helping them out, teaching them, mentoring them, coaching them, getting them to understand and to follow through on normally a lot of their own ideas that they just might not be comfortable with. The won'ts are a different category. But if you, through the way you deal with them, kneecap to kneecap, show them that this isn't about you, because leadership's never about you. It's always about the other person. And they understand that it's about the team, the unit, the organization. The won'ts, for the most part, will shift they may shift into the can't category, but when you take the can'ts into the cans and the won'ts into the can'ts, you've now created something in your organization where you start to see this circle of great innovation, of excitement, of energy, and a building of a culture. And then every day in that, whatever it is for you, that 3 to 5 minutes, just think of those three things: competence, compassion, courage to inspire.
Yes, my takeaway is you're leaning into empowering others to rise, not to simply follow because it's mandated.
Yeah, I firmly believe that's what good organizations do.
So then my question off of that at its core is leadership about service or is it about sacrifice?
I don't think you can necessarily separate those two in this venue. Ultimately, it is service to the purpose of your organization, but it's also service to the individual. And in that, to serve them requires you to sacrifice. And the
Okay,
sacrifice it requires is your time to do, let's call it, the rest of your job, right?
got it.
Some leaders would say, "Hey, I don't have time to go sit down with everybody in my organization." And what I would say is, you can't afford not to sit down with everybody in your organization.
Wow.
As the commander of Marine Corps Forces Atlantic, which was my last job, that roughly 55,000 sailors, Marines, civilians. I sat down with groups of every, now did I get all of them? Probably not. I probably got 75, 80% of them. But in person, I would communicate to those organizations what I call my commander's intent. If you're not in the military, I would call it your leader's intent. What is the purpose of your organization? What is the method? And by method, I don't mean on Mondays we do this and on Tuesdays. What I mean there is, what are the characteristics we're going to follow to achieve our purpose? What are we going to build on? And in that, what were my zero tolerance behaviors? What are the things that if you cross this red line, you can stand by for heavy seas? And then out of that, if that's our purpose and that's where we go, what is our end state? And by end state, I mean, what does excellence look like? Nobody joins an organization to be mediocre. I just have never seen it. And even now, as I'm out working with industry and some sports teams and collegiate athletes, and some people aren't as excited about excellence, but when you peel the onion all the way back, they joined because they felt like they were going to be a part of something special. So now, if you can communicate that fairly succinctly, people in the organization now, when they're faced with a situation that you haven't laid out an ABC kind of a thing, that your method is more characteristics, they will know inherently, relatively, where they should go, how they should act independently. And in that, you sacrifice total control, but by sacrificing your total control, you're serving the organization better. They are serving the organization better, and they will achieve far beyond your expectations. I've seen it time and again.
So in that context, because you're choosing impact, how do you manage ego? Because we all have an ego. So you're placing impact over ego here.
I think the way you impact ego is by having people understand your expectations of their personal commitment. In James Kerr's book Legacy, and I'll apologize up front if this offends anyone, but it's a book written about the New Zealand All Blacks rugby team, the most successful sports team to date. I think they still have over a 88% winning average. That's pretty impressive. But there's a chapter in that
Amazing.
book called, I apologize, No Dickheads. What I've translated
Understood.
to others, no brilliant jerks. And in my
Well said.
commander's intent, I communicate our organization will in my zero tolerance behaviors, I will not tolerate brilliant jerks. You might be the best fill in the blank in whatever is in our organization, but that will be antithetical to our culture of it's about the team, that the team comes first. Every team should be made up of leaders. Everybody needs to be a leader. Toughest form of leadership is peer leadership, where the only authority you have is what I call moral authority. People must believe that what you want them to do is not only good for the organization, but it's good for them. And immediately they will watch you to make sure that you exhibit those behaviors. So if you make it known that you will not tolerate brilliant jerks, That just tells people to check their ego at the door. It doesn't mean I don't want them to walk into the room and think that they're the baddest dude or dudette that ever walked the face of the planet. I want them to have that level of confidence. I just don't want them to live that ideal that I'm better than you. One of the tenets that I put out to the people that I work with is nobody in any organization is more important than anybody else. When I was a
Mhm.
3-star, I might have had more responsibility. I might have had more authority, but I was no more important than that most junior Marine in the last formation farthest away from me, because if that young Marine or sailor or civilian couldn't execute their mission against what I had laid out as my intent, then we were never going to be able to achieve the things we could have achieved as an organization. If everybody comes to the table with that ideal, it fundamentally changes organizations because everybody now sees that they have an important role. And that's what really can transform organizations to being truly excellent.
And are the majority of today's organizations embracing that, or do you find that absent?
I think the really good organizations are embracing it. They may not know it. Some of them may not have communicated it in those specific terms, but when I can convince them to look back on things and see them that way, they start to make that a known quantity of the way the organization works. Now, as a leader, you have to be humble enough to walk that walk, to realize that there is no job that you shouldn't be willing to execute. I'll take you to a Marine example. If I'm out walking around wherever I'm stationed and I see a piece of trash, I'll stop and pick it up. That flies through every organization. You won't believe this. The commanding general was walking by and I saw him pick up some trash and he threw it in the right. Why? Because professional is the way we reflect. Are we proud of where we live? Are we proud of where we work? Right? Leave it better than you found it. All
Hmm.
Blacks have a saying they call it sweeping the shed after the match. And you can appreciate this with your sports background. You're in the locker room. All that tape comes off. The plastic bottles are all thrown down. The towels of sweat and nastiness are laying all over the place. And they have a tradition where they basically debrief every game. When all that's done and people head off to their lockers, the team captains police up the towels and the tape and the bottles and the trash. And that idea is leaders sweep the shed, right? General Mattis had a saying that every leader carried his own pack. Didn't matter if you were a general, you carried your own pack. Nobody carried your gear for you. Those were hugely important things, not just as signs, but that commitment over time allows people to understand hey, if it's there, do it. Pick it up, strap it on, take on the hard things. And if you need some help, oh, by the way, ask for help, right? And that's another piece that I think is critically important.
It feels very much like a principle, value based mantra. And my sense, and correct me if I'm mistaken, I feel like it's lacking in today's world. I feel like the civility and the sensitivity toward others has, for some reason, been vacated. That it's been about ego, it's been about sensationalism. And I sit back and I look for an athlete or a musician or a coach or a leader, and I find myself looking back to the past, not in the present or the future. And I'm really struggling with this. For me, it's been Teddy Roosevelt, Muhammad Ali, and I go down a list greater, but I'm like, a father of two daughters, who are they looking at today or tomorrow? And I don't know if it's me getting older or if there's something that's been vacated or exactly what it is. But I'd be interested to hear your perspective without politicizing this. I'm not asking for a political commentary in any way.
You mentioned it at the outset. I was privileged to work for President George Herbert Walker Bush, and I would tell anybody who listens to this thing that, without a doubt, the most amazing leader, absolutely selfless, made decisions that cost him important personal gain.
Can you share an example?
Yeah, I mean, in his first term, he was approached by his economic advisors, and they told him that the economy had taken a downturn and that they had done all the analysis and that the only thing he could do was to raise taxes. And the political folks told him, nope, you can't do that. His 1988 campaign was read my lips, no new taxes. And he he was an unbelievably prepared, read, thorough, uh, brilliant, brilliant leader. And he said, basically, hey, I've looked at this problem, and if I raise taxes, potentially only one person is hurt, and that would be me. And I agree. You guys told me that, and I agree. He goes, but if I don't do it, tens, if not hundreds of millions of Americans could be harmed in this event. And he said, so it's pretty straightforward and simple. He said, we're going to raise taxes. Turned to the political guy, said, you figure out how to get me reelected. Well, they did. But if you read Bill Clinton's biography, he would tell you that for the first 6 of his 8 years, the thing that allowed him to build the strongest economy the nation had ever known at that point was that tax hike by President George Herbert Walker Bush. And I don't know this as a fact, but I sense that that had something to do with their great personal relationship, which a lot of America couldn't figure out when they would go around the world for all great causes. But I think there was that shared sense that the success of the Clinton administration was in part delivered by a great leader who was absolutely selfless, who checked his ego at the door. Now, he didn't check his competitiveness at the door. Losing that election, and he says in his, and there have been a number of great books written about him. Gene Becker, his chief of staff, has written some superb books about his post White House days, and his biographer has written some excellent books about his time in office. He was competitive, don't get me wrong, but not at the expense of others. He wanted to win, but not by taking the curved road to get there. Meaning, if it was unethical, he was never going to step across that line. That's the leader that perhaps we're, in search of, is that leader that can check their ego at the door, can do the right thing, not the easy thing. And I think part of what's going on now is we become so divisive in where we're at that sometimes it's difficult to step out of people's comfort zone to go there for fear of what for fear of what it is. I mean, I would say one of the things that made President Bush, that shaped who he ended up being, a military leader. He served in combat. He saw the results of what happens you know when things go bad. And so he always, I think, had in the back of his mind that sense of taking care of other people. How do I make it better for everybody else? There's a saying that says, the reward of the leader is not what they get, but what they leave behind. And I think he lived that every day. It wasn't about him getting something. It was about thinking about, what am I going to leave behind? And whether that was for the nation, whether it was for his kids, for his grandkids, it was always with an eye to what was going to be better for them. And ego doesn't play a part in that. Whether you're an athlete, whether you're in politics, there is a real challenge to focus on the reward as opposed to what true success really means. And if you can separate those two, then, those are the leaders I want to follow.
Remarkable. So one's about thinking about your legacy, as you put it, how are you going to leave things? And others are living in the moment for me now. What can I get?
Yeah, but legacy in the sense of not how am I going to look, but legacy in the sense of how is the organization that I've been privileged to lead going to be perceived? The thing that brings me the most reward is looking at those young leaders that I had the privilege to lead who have gone on to do great things. A number of them 3 stars, one of them 4-star Marine Corps general. I just look at that and I'm thrilled, right? I'm excited. And not that I made them what they were, but we all served in an organization whose legacy now is, when others look inside it, they look back to say, where did that individual come from? Where did that individual serve? Where did that, and it's the legacy of the organization that says, that's the kind of organization I want to be a part of, and allows them then to peel that onion apart a little bit, say, okay, what actually made that organization great? Was it individuals or was it the team? Right? Was it,
Okay.
and
So based
that's,
on
to
that,
me, that's the legacy I talk about, is not the individual's legacy, but rather the legacy of the organization that they lead.
So does culture drive leadership, or does leadership drive culture?
There's no doubt in my mind that leadership drives culture, but you have to, once again, you can take charge of an organization that has a tremendous culture. New coach, but there's an existing culture. That's
Been there.
tremendous. The phrase I use with sports teams is a static culture is a dying culture.
What does that mean?
What that means is if you don't invest in that culture every day, if you don't invest to make it stronger, better, more focused on the whole as opposed to individuals, then that culture that you know as a successful culture is already starting to die. It's already starting to erode. It's already starting to go away.
What happens when you join an org that's got a corrosive culture?
You have to identify it, and then you have to turn it around. And you turn it around in that intent, right? You communicate immediately to everybody, what is our purpose? If you're a sports team, it doesn't mean winning the championship. That may be a byproduct of your culture, and I would offer it probably will be, but there has to be some patience in that. But as you build each individual into being the best leader that they can be, the culture of the organization will be about improving each other. And by improving each other, the culture builds stronger towards achieving that purpose. And then as that goes, you get that glimpse defined hopefully by the leader of what excellence looks like. And then excellence will continue to build that positive culture. When I talk to teams, when I talk to organizations and businesses, my catchphrase in the, to your point, how do you get there? Hire for culture, train for talent. Now, if you're a sports team, you need a certain level of talent, right? You can't take John Wissler out and put him on the mound because I couldn't, in my best of days, I might have been able to throw a 70-mile-an-hour fastball, and that thing's going to end up not in the stands. It's going to end up out of the park, right? But when you are looking for those people, who are the people that are going to come and they're going to be that match for your culture? They're going to be the people that will resonate off of each other, build each other up, give that resilience, allow that team to get stronger, be really excited by the success of the team. My work at the Naval Academy, I worked with a number of teams whose team captains weren't even starters. Now think about that. They weren't starters because they weren't the best athletes. Were they trying to become starters on those teams? No doubt about it. But they were the best leaders, and therefore they were unbelievably successful as team captains. And oh, by the way, for the people who maybe weren't on the starting fill in the blank, they communicated a culture that said we're all starters. If you wear this
Nice.
uniform, you're a starter. The fact that you're not on the pitch first, or you're not on the court first, or you're not on that doesn't mean that you're not a critically important part of the success of this team. And when and if you have that opportunity that you show up on the field of play, you have to be ready to fill in for whoever went down. And that same thing translates into the most difficult environment, which is a military that's serving in combat. Everybody may not be perceived as a quote starter, but at the end of the day, you all have the very real potential of being starters because injury, whatever, could cause you to have to step in the moment and be that person who's ready to be that selfless servant warrior leader of character who makes a difference in the lives of the people that they lead.
Is this taught or is this learned?
Learned.
Learned. Experience and
Yeah, but both. I mean, I tell people that especially if you're in the military profession, but it translates. The neat thing about leadership is leadership is leadership. Leadership in combat, leadership in the military is leadership in your business. Everybody is facing an adversary. Are the outcomes significantly different in combat? I would offer that there is potential loss of life. But let's flip that around. There's a potential loss of livelihood if you're a poor leader in the civilian sector. And so loss of livelihood can have psychologically very many of the same impacts that poor leadership in combat has. So what you want to have as a leader is you want to have a 3,000-year-old mind. You want to read enough
How so?
about other leaders. So as I say, experienced, it's experienced, but it's experienced against the backdrop of reading about amazing leaders of history. I would tell you, if you want to be a great leader, pick two leaders. I don't care what their background is. Pick two leaders and read everything you can read about them. That will lead you to read other things. That will lead you to start comparing, okay, where am I in that competence, compassion, courage to inspire construct against this individual, this, and you will, and then that's where it becomes experiential, right? Because you know enough to ask yourself the right hard questions. So it's a little bit of both. It's learned, it is experienced, but I would offer you have to have that 3,000-year-old mind to ask yourself the no kidding, really hard questions about, am I doing this right?
Oh, I love that. That's great. And I can appreciate you advising tech companies and financial firms and academic institutions, as well as leadership groups, how there's a through line between the battlefield leadership and modern business. It really comes through. So I appreciate the direction. Oh, leaders are under intense pressure today to stay in the moment, whether it's a shareholder return on investment. Everything's now, not tomorrow, not planning for the future. And yet we're talking about developing great things like culture, value, purpose. And those don't always offer a return on today's investment. It does philosophically, but hard currency, not so much. How do you reconcile those and how do you counsel your clients when they're under that level of pressure?
First of all, it goes back to that idea of courage. I'm firmly convinced after having seen it in the great men and women I served with and read about it that physical courage is built by small moments of moral courage every day, of doing the right thing, not the easy thing. And that translates, and these are not my words, these are words that I've sort of accumulated over time and been privileged to attend, where you'll get people who've won the Medal of Honor or the Navy Cross, or you're having a great conversation with them about, and there's always seems to be the question to them about, how was it that you were the bravest person in the moment? And their answer is usually something along the lines of, well, I wasn't the bravest person in the moment. And then somebody will say, well, okay, but how is it that you did what you did? And then they say, I was able to hold on one moment longer.
Ooh,
And then that question morphs into, well, how did you train yourself to be able to hold on one moment longer? And then
yes.
that answer becomes small acts of moral courage every day that allowed me to build up sort of the quote muscle memory of courage that when faced with that, I could hold on one moment longer, and holding on one moment longer to what was right, not what was easy. So, right, holding on one moment longer to what was right, not what was easy, manifested itself in physical courage and then allowed me to achieve whatever it was that I achieved. So I think that idea of small acts of moral courage every day, and some of those small acts of moral courage, to your current question, might be communicating that we have to maybe look at sub-optimizing our
Ooh,
profit margin right now, because we are building something that will allow us to grow significantly greater and faster. And I will come back to you with proof of that within, and then you have to have studied it. You going back to the President Bush model, you have to believe in it strongly enough that you are willing to go there. And that's when you rally the team and you go, hey, team, here's where we're at. This isn't all about the bottom line, but guess what? At the end of the day, we got to make some progress. So what I'm telling you is we got to double down on this right now. And how do you get there? And this is the key thing. A lot of people will talk about balance, right?
yeah.
How do you get balance in your life? And I would offer there's no such thing as balance. What you can achieve is harmony. So think of it like music, right? Balance sort of assumes, let's say there's four things critically important to you. While I was on active duty, the four things critically important to me in descending order were my faith, my family, what the country demanded of me, and what the Marine Corps demanded of me. Faith, family, country, corps. F squared, C squared. I used to joke with people, it's not my grades, it's the things that are most important. Balance would assume you put 25% into each of them, which we all know is impossible, because sometimes those things are going to take more importance. The country's going to demand that you go to war. The Marine Corps is going to demand that you're in a training environment, that you're away from your home. Your faith is going to demand a full time, your family, all those things. But now think of it from harmony. Think of the right notes all mixed together to make that sort of beautiful music, right? And how you
Yes.
achieve harmony is when it's the time for that note, you are 100% in to deliver that note crisp and clear. Maybe it's not as much time, right? But when you're in there 100% and you're able to block out the rest of those things. When it's family, when you're in there 100%. My personal example of that is, I'd come home. I was a company commander, I had about 200 Marines I'm responsible for. I'd get home at the end of a long day. The only thing I really wanted was a cold beer and to sit out on my back porch. And then there'd be one of my kids on one leg wanting to do Legos. There'd be another one that wanted to go do a tea party, and there'd be all these other things. And, and, and it took me a while to figure out that the cold beer has to wait.
Yes.
You got to be in 100% in the moment. And that's the young kid example. And as your kids get older, you have to be in there 100%, right? And then when it's time to go to what the nation demands, obviously you've got to be in 100%. And now I change that into faith, family, what my community demands of me, and what my career demands of me. So same idea. When you're in 100%. And I've seen that you can achieve harmony. It is challenging. But by focusing on harmony, going back to your sort of question that got us here, that's how you communicate that the bottom line isn't always the most important thing. People should just figure out what are their four, five, three, the number is unimportant. What are those things that are most important to you? And then when you're in the moment, you're 100% in the moment. And if you can do that, you will find that over time, you will be more productive. You will, in fact, get a better bottom line. And here's the reason, going back to that loving the people that you lead, your people will
Yes.
see that they're not rented mules, that
Mm.
you find harmony in your life. That allows them to find harmony in their life. And now all of a sudden, their commitment to the organization goes up because they know you're going to allow them the time to find harmony. And because it's important to you, it's important to them. And then it becomes critical to the organization.
Really well said. I appreciate that. I'm reflecting on the F squared C squared. I like that formula a lot. And of course, harmony over balance as such. If you were advising the next generation of leaders for the United States today, what would your singular counsel be for that next generation, given the global complexity?
It goes back to having a 3,000-year-old mind.
Love that.
But in today, you also have to have a 30-minute-old mind. I look at my own case. I'm trying to read and learn and understand things that I will probably never be in charge of, but will impact my life. So,
Yes.
artificial intelligence, I've had to get into that to understand it well enough to understand where it could impact my life, understanding the global economy, understanding what different things really mean, not what comes off of people's lips on the internet, in news feeds and whatever, but rather to read, to find some subject matter expert, to have some conversations. And in all of that, tie it into how does that or will that make me a better leader? Because my guidance to them was, yes, America needs better technologists. Yes, America needs better entrepreneurs. Yes, America needs better doctors and lawyers, and you can fill in the blank with everything else. And some of those things will change based on technologies, which you understand, but it will not fundamentally change the need for great leaders in this country. And if you are a great leader and you understand those other things, you will be incredibly valuable to any organization in this country. That idea of being able to develop what I call winning teams, right? Teams of
Yes.
excellence. That's a skill set that translates across any profession. That fundamental leadership is the discriminator amongst the highly successful organizations, and I'm not talking about dollar signs, two organizations, one organization may be in a dollar sign basis above another organization, but sustainably successful organizations over time have a leadership component to them that makes them able to withstand the highs and the lows. In other words, as you mentioned earlier, not simply to survive, but to thrive.
Mm.
Because it's leadership that makes the difference. And why? Because those are learning organizations. Why are they learning organizations? Because the people there understand they have a real input, regardless of where they are. And they can bring difficult problems to the positional leader that says, have you thought about? And they won't be dismissed. And they also won't be unafraid to pick up somebody else's load if they have to, or at least have the conversation.
This is great. So many facts and kernels of truth. I won't enunciate on each of them. I'll let the listeners pull what they like, because it can go in a lot of different directions. But what I'd like to do would be to close on this, General. A simple question. What do you believe about leadership now after 40 plus years of service that you did not believe when you started?
I would say at the very beginning, I thought I needed to be the expert. I thought I needed to understand everything, that I had to stand up in front of, in that first case, 43 people and convince them that I knew everything about what it was we were going to do. And if you look back on my time, it's the late 70s, and I have, multiple tour Vietnam veterans. I have young enlisted guys who've been doing this job twice or three times as long as I have been. And I rapidly came to the understanding that I don't need to be the expert. That what I need to be is that caring leader, that selfless servant, warrior leader of character that makes a difference in the lives of the people that they lead. That I need to sit down kneecap to kneecap and get to know them and to understand them, and then to love them through my action. Trust me, that was not anything that I saw early on. And what comes part and parcel to that is, not only do you not need to know everything, but you have to be willing to ask questions from
Yes.
the junior most person to the senior most person, and to be open enough to be learning. If you approach your future as a leader that way, you're going to find that you will be much more accepted. You will be much more successful because you can make better decisions. There's a saying in the military is and this goes across everything. I learned it in the military. They won't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Can you repeat that?
Sure. They won't care how much you know
Yes.
until they know how much you
How
care.
much you care. Wow.
And if you approach your future in that simple vein, that will spread out to all those other things, believe it or not, that we've talked about here today, because it will allow you to grow as an individual, as a leader, as a professional. It will impact every bit of your life, from family to work to community. And you'll just be known as that person that is willing to value other people's experience more than you value your own. And I think that's
Fabulous.
what makes the difference.
Thank you. General, if a listener is interested in engaging you for a speaking opportunity, a consultation, a business project, how would you like us to present people to you? Is there a website? We can include it in the show notes as well, but I'm curious if you're open to that.
Yeah, certainly I'm open to that, because leadership's my passion. And if I can help people get to be better leaders, I'm all over that. My wife would tell you that I'm failing retirement magnificently. I would tell you that I'm failing retirement miserably, but they both mean the same thing. It's just she's nicer than I am.
That's hilarious.
No, if they want to, yeah, send me an email, John, John, Wissler, Wissler, at jpw solutions.com. That's my consulting business. The easiest way is to just send me that email. After that, I can refer them to my website to see if there's anything in there they want to look at. They can ask me questions, and we can sort of discuss what it is they want to do.
Great.
As I said, this leadership thing, the beauty of it is It works everywhere. All I have to learn to help somebody else be better is learn their lexicon. I've worked with doctors, with dentists, with construction companies, with cloud developers, with you name it. I mean, it has proven to me that being a great leader is really about fundamentals. And if I can help somebody build those fundamentals, I'll be happy to do
Outstanding. General Wissler, it's a profound honor. Thank you for your service, not just in uniform, but in the values and example you continue to set for the communities that you serve and the communities that you touch. I'm extremely grateful to have you in my circle and to consider you a friend and a mentor in many ways. And I'm blessed to have your time today. Thank you.
that. Now, Miles, thank you, and most importantly, thank you for your friendship. It's awesome, and I appreciate it.
You're the best.